The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern after Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah movement mounted a round of cross-border strikes, the biggest since the war in Gaza and Israel began. Let's talk to Filippo Dionigi, senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Bristol, whose focus is on Lebanon, Syria and Islamist movements. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
What's your reading of this moment?
I think we are we're seeing a continuation of the type of war that we saw since October 8th between Hezbollah and Israel. We see a progression in the intensity of the war, an increase in the tension, and an escalation in the types of weapons that they use. And yet the war still remains relatively controlled. It's more of an attrition war. It has not exploded yet at a level of a regional major conflagration for the time being. And what we saw yesterday very much looked like an announced response from Hezbollah, especially with regard to the attack that it suffered from Israel on the 30th of July against one of its major commanders that has been killed in the suburb area of Beirut on that day. The response, however, was relatively restrained compared to what it could have been expected, at least. Israel has tried to anticipate that response, and that has produced, again, a very intense exchange, but one that, is relatively restrained from what were the expectation for that kind of action.
And is it fair to say that none of these events, both the ones you and I are talking about now, plus Gaza, plus northern Israel, southern Israel, displacement there, and the talks ongoing, none of these are happening in isolation. They are all very much interwoven at any given moment. Yeah.
Yes, of course. I think, what we're witnessing here, and is a typical Middle Eastern dynamics where political negotiations are always interconnected between states and interdependent between states. And therefore, also in this case, we see that degree of interdependence. However, we saw that yesterday the Israeli delegation that is taking part in the ceasefire negotiations has decided to leave Tel Aviv and take part in the negotiations in Cairo. That meaning, again, that attack has not deterred Israel from taking part in the negotiations. I think what we may witness is possibly a progressive decoupling of the Israel-Gaza dynamics from the Israeli-Lebanese dynamics to an extent. We know that Hezbollah has said explicitly that the moment in which there will be a ceasefire in Gaza, they will also abide to that ceasefire and they will cease hostilities. But we also know that on some occasions, Israel has actually said that that is not necessarily the case for them. So there are two channels here going on. On one hand, there is the Gaza-Israeli negotiations. On the other, there is the question of northern Israel, South Lebanon, and Hezbollah-Israeli tensions.
And will that decoupling happen sort of slowly, organically, do you think, rather than in a big event or a big?
Well, it's difficult. Yeah, I think what we saw so far is that the whole process, again, is developing as an attrition war and not as a major conflagration in that sense. And also in that way, it could, the hostilities may continue pretty much at the level that we saw so far, with the possibility that occasionally they may spike and then they return to be controlled and then they continue in that sense. Israel is carrying out a number of operations that are demonstrating of being relatively successful in using the intelligence that they have against Hezbollah. Hezbollah's retaliation yesterday, to an extent, was a response to that use of intelligence, because the target that they hit was actually the military center of Israel for intelligence, or at least one of them, one of the most important, therefore sending a message that they also have intelligence on military locations in Israel, in a sense. So we will see if, again, the war proceeds along those lines. But again, there's always the risk that things may go wrong and there might be, major mistakes, major incidents. And at that point, violence may escalate and things might go out of control.
And how much of an issue is it for Israel that it now has effectively war? Well, it's not. In a certain sense, this has been true since October the 7th, but it has war on two fronts really now.
Well, it has tried to manage both fronts, and it has the military capacity to do so, but it has also avoided to open an all-out war in the northern front. And possibly one of the explanation is the fact that a war on two fronts would be particularly difficult to manage. What I think is the real high price that Israel is paying for this war is that de facto Hezbollah has managed to establish a buffering area in northern Israel where tens of thousands of Israelis have been displaced from that area. And that has a high economic cost for Israel too. Not only economic, it's also political cost. I mean, the Netanyahu's government has portrayed itself as the government of security, but obviously major displacement is the country of security, is exactly the contrary of what they intend to achieve. And therefore, this is an issue that they have to solve. And they know that an all-out war with Hezbollah probably would not lead to that kind of solution. In fact, would exacerbate the situation on northern Israel.
And you mentioned displaced people, hundreds of thousands of displaced people on both sides of that Israeli-Gaza border.
Exactly.
And we hear that serious ill health breaking out in the form of polio, other diseases because of unsanitary water and the like. And, we have this bizarre situation, don't we, where Israel, whilst fighting these wars on both sides, is delivering polio vaccines into Gaza. And the whole thing just seems like I don't know, there doesn't seem to be any end to it. These awful contrasts within this war are difficult to metabolize, aren't they?
This is a war that has been going on for a century now. If we talk broadly about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it's a cycle that feeds itself. And I think the war that Hezbollah has started against Israel on October 8 is just the latest episode of this cycle of violence, where an attack is responded with another attack, and that continues. And there doesn't seem to be an off-ramp for that de-escalation to happen. Yesterday evening, Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, has given a speech in which was claiming responsibility for the attack they unleashed on Sunday morning. And it seemed like there was a margin to read that speech as a form of de-escalation. He said, if we are satisfied with this response, we will consider the matter sorted. So Israel has a chance now to also sort of de-escalate on that front, but we will see whether they actually intend to pursue that de-escalation.